Good morning. If you've just joined us, welcome to Can I Say That at Work? Organizing Undercover. We're going to start in a minute.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, but I think we're going to wait maybe one more minute and just give folks a chance to get in. This is Can I Say That at Work? Organizing Undercover. We're happy to have you. We're excited to get started. Sarah, I think this is like the first slot, right, for Netroots Nation?
That's right.
A lot of pressure.
Good morning. If you're just joining us, this is Can I Say That at Work? Organizing Undercover. We're going to give everyone another moment or two, and then we'll get started. Thank you. Okay, good morning. Welcome to Can I Say That at Work? Organizing Undercover. We are using at Netroots Nation Zoom webinar, so you will be muted throughout the duration of this training, but please feel free to add your voice by dropping comments in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. In fact, there are going to be certain points when Mariana and I ask you to add your comments to the chat box. Separate from the chat box, there is a Q&A box. Please put your questions there. We will be taking designated breaks during this training to address your questions. If we don't get to your questions or comments during this training, you are welcome to follow up with us after. Now, using the chat box, how many of you want to improve your workplace? We're going to give you a moment to respond.
Sarah, maybe just repeat the question.
Yes. How many of you want to improve your workplace? Okay, I see a yep. Yeah, we're seeing some good responses coming in. Thank you. Keep them coming.
Great. So while that chat, this is Mariana, but while the chat box fills with people who indicate whether they want to improve their workplace, we're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves. My name is Mariana Padillas. I'm with the United Steelworkers International Union. I'm the Assistant Director of Organizing. My contact information is here in case you want to get in touch about organizing. And just to address a question that was in the chat, yes, this presentation will be completely applicable to nonprofit workplaces. The steelworkers, even though we have a very industrial name, the whole name is the United Steel, Paper and Forestry, Rubber, Energy, Manufacturing, Allied Industrial and Service Workers International Union, which is a way to say like we represent everybody. We've been doing some nonprofit organizing very recently and right now. And so we're happy to have people who are interested in how to improve their workplaces through collective action. Sarah?
Yes, and my name is Sarah Tarlow. I'm an associate attorney at Spear Wilderman, a labor and employee benefits law firm in Philadelphia, where we represent a variety of workers. As Mariana already touched upon, this training is going to provide a brief overview of the law. I should say a brief overview of your legal rights, the potential risks, and best practices to talk to your coworkers about a union. I want to emphasize this is not do-it-yourself, organize your workplace. Please contact Mariana, our local organizer, if you're considering an organizing campaign. Each organizing campaign is unique, and nothing in this training constitutes nor should be viewed as legal advice for any particular situation. Now, Mariana, can you tell us what are some of the benefits of forming a union? And in fact, actually, I'm going to open this back out to the audience. What do you think are some of the benefits to forming a union? Go ahead and drop your comments in the chat box. We'll give folks a moment to respond.
This is Mariana. So in the chat box, we have a question. What are the benefits of forming your union? Kieran says actual organizing power, not perceived power. Bargaining power from Andres. Fair salaries, hopefully, from Lauren. I think all of this is a really good start. Pushing back against the bullies in management, absolutely.
This is
all true. So just as a quick overview, because we don't know how much experience people have with unions, there are a lot of ways that your working life can improve through forming your union. When you form your union, you have the right to negotiate with management, and you can improve working conditions. You can get better pay. You can negotiate better health care, whether that's a different plan that works better for you and your family, different kinds of splits on the premiums or co-pays. You can help negotiate a safer workplace, which I think is really important for us right now. I know that my union, the steelworkers, we're negotiating various agreements to talk about workplace safety during COVID, and also providing a lot of virtual training for our members about how to keep themselves safe during COVID. They can help provide retirement security. I know that pensions are kind of a thing of the past, but with unions, people are still sometimes able to negotiate for pensions or for more generous 401k or other kinds of retirement savings plans. I'm going to go out of order here, and in the bottom right-hand corner, we just have better benefits in general. And then I think what's actually the most important thing is the voice at work. Sarah, do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yes, thank you, Mariana. So this is Sarah speaking, and yes, everything that Mariana covered is absolutely spot on as depicted in our Life is Better with a Union slide. Thank you, AFL-CIO, for providing it. But yes, talking about your voice at work, there are many ways in which you get to articulate your voice at work when you form a union. You are granted the legal right to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement or a contract with your employer. In this process, you and your coworkers sit across the table from employers, and you negotiate wages, hours, benefits, basically most of the things that are featured on the Life is Better with a Union slide. A grievance process. And what is excellent about forming a union contract is, under the law, while you and your employer are negotiating a union contract or a collective bargaining agreement, you're considered equals. And there's many ways, actually, throughout the negotiation process and even before you get to the negotiation process, that your voice is heard. It's not uncommon that a negotiating committee is formed of your coworkers, and your coworkers will then elicit your thoughts and your fellow coworkers' thoughts, either through surveys, meetings, focus groups, to try and figure out, what do you want in that union contract? What are things that you want to see negotiated at the bargaining table? Well, there actually are some things, and Mariana has already touched upon this, there actually are some things that your employer has to negotiate, known as mandatory subjects of bargaining. That includes things like wages, so your salary increases, how much paid time off you have, like vacation time, sick leave. When are your hours in terms of working conditions? Can you work from home? Can you work remotely? And the creation of a labor management committee, which will address issues that must be bargained. In addition there's also the end point of contract negotiations known as contract ratification. So once a contract has been reached, it will be put to you and your coworkers, and you have the right to vote for it. And if you think it's a great deal, you'll vote for it. Or if you think it isn't a good deal, you can vote it down. So that's another way in which you get to exercise your voice when you form a union. Mariana, do you want to also talk about, your voice at work with respect to due process?
Yeah, I'm going to actually go a little bit out of order and touch on transparency first. So you have your voice at work, but then also you have, when you win your union, you have the right to information about your workplace. So your union has the right to put in information requests about working conditions. And this can really help because this is a way to get management to answer the questions about potential changes to policy, to working conditions that sometimes non-union workers are left in the dark about. Things just happen without any explanation. And when you ask maybe your direct supervisor, maybe they don't know. Maybe it wasn't explained to them. So when you have your union, there is more transparency because of this right to information and the ability to have the conversation as equals with management to talk through issues. You also have transparency in terms of when you have your contract, which is also called a collective bargaining agreement or a CBA. This sets out kind of a blueprint of what work should look like during the term of the contract. It's generally 3 years, but there will be terms about wages, benefits, working conditions. Again, like Sarah said, this is in keeping with what your bargaining committee negotiated and what the membership agreed to. So this isn't something that happens to you. This is an active process that you participate in. And so it just also helps people understand what the expectations are on both sides during the term of the contract. One more thing that's important for folks is due process. When you win your union, you have the right to ask for union representation during the investigations that may lead to discipline. This means that rather than having to go to an interview with HR all on your own, you can actually have a union advocate on your side. So it's another set of ears. It's somebody who can push back against management and kind of ask questions. Again, information requests are available here. Every contract that I've seen, but again, it's your contract, so I can't promise what's going to be in yours, has a grievance procedure that generally ends in final and binding arbitration, so that if there is discipline that is made without just cause, so not fairly, or maybe the punishment doesn't fit the violation, then you can enter into this grievance procedure with your employer. And it'll end with a third party making the decision about whether the discipline is just or not, which is different than what's probably happening now, which is that management gets the final say on it. The grievance procedure is also used to enforce the terms of the contract, to make sure that there's a way to make sure that management sticks to them. Sarah, should we move on to labor law basics?
Yes, thanks, Mariana. This is Sarah speaking again, and thank you for rounding out our conversation about the benefits of a union. So before we actually talk about your rights to talk about unionization at work, we need to cover some basics about labor law and the National Labor Relations Board. The rules that govern private sector workers, those that don't work in the government, differ from the rules that pertain to public sector workers. So your classic public sector worker, teachers, postal workers. I want to briefly pause and do a shout out if there are any postal workers in our audience or attending Netroots, or you have family members that are working for the postal services. We salute you. Thank you for all the hard work you're doing. But yes, unions do represent both private sector and public sector workers, but the rules differ. And for the purposes of this training, we're going to concentrate on private sector workers. Now, as we talk about the rules that govern organizing in the private sector, we have to mention the National Labor Relations Board, which Mariana and I may refer to as the Labor Board or the NLRB during the course of this training. So the NLRB is an independent federal agency that enforces the National Labor Relations Act. In regulating organizing conduct, the National Labor Relations Board's primary concern is to protect the statutory rights of workers. But where do your rights as a worker, where do they come from? Where do your rights to organize come from? Well, they come from Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act, which provides that, and I'm going to actually quote the statute here, workers have the right to self-organization, to form, join, or assist labor organizations, and to engage in other concerted activities for the purpose of collective bargaining or other mutual aid or protection. And you can see we actually have this up on our slide here. Under the Act, if an employer interferes with, restrains, or coerces employees in the exercise of those guaranteed rights, you may file an unfair labor practice charge with the National Labor Relations Board. Now, I mentioned a term in talking about Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act, concerted activity. What is concerted activity? It's simply activity undertaken together by two or more workers or undertaken by one worker on behalf of others. Concerted activity can simply be a conversation between only one speaker and one listener if the conversation has some relation to group action in the interest of workers. Typical concerted activities include union organizing, the discussion of unionization among workers, taking action to enforce the terms of a union contract or collective bargaining agreement. And they also can be activities by groups of workers unaffiliated with a union to improve their workplaces. You do not need to be in a union or trying to organize a union to engage in concerted activity. Concerted activities include actions not related to forming a union or collective bargaining. So, for example, if you and your coworkers draft a letter petition seeking higher wages at your workplace and you circulate it to your coworkers to sign, that's concerted activity. So I've talked a little bit about what concerted activity is. What isn't concerted activity? Well, concerted activity excludes individual action in pursuit of your own personal interest, even if it is employment related. So the classic example, if you're asking for a raise for just yourself, that is not considered concerted activity. Mariana, could you talk to us a little bit about how social media fits into concerted activity?
Yeah, this is Mariana. So concerted activity can definitely happen on social media. It can happen online, as can activity that falls outside of the protection of the National Labor Relations Act. One thing to remember is that, I mean, I know we all know this, right? We're at Netroots Nation, we're attending a virtual conference. Things online aren't secret, right? So if you are engaging in these sorts of collective actions, maybe it's talking on Facebook with coworkers about how slippery the floor is without a cone being up to say it's wet, right? That could be concerted activity because you're acting on behalf of your coworkers about a working condition. Does complaining about your boss online count as concerted activity? Probably not. I mean, I'm a lawyer too, actually. So, Sarah and I will make the argument that, the complaint about the boss is something that affects everybody. But the safest thing to do is if you're talking online in a way that is public and you are talking about working conditions, it will be more protected if it is about something that affects everybody, that you're trying to improve for everyone. Now, that's different than if you are trying to start an organizing campaign. Then I think there's kind of a different calculus you go through, which we're going to talk about later, in terms of, even though it's protected, is it the smartest thing to do? Because keeping the campaign secret for as long as possible is actually an important part of the strategy. But I think we should stop here for a little bit for questions. I saw in the chat that there was a question from Lauren about whether, was it say, how does this work if you get fired in an at-will state? And I think she's asking about the grievance procedure that I was talking about. So there are workplace protections in place right now for you. They are federal laws and state laws, and they provide the minimum of what your employer has to give, right? So like we know that they shouldn't discriminate, right? Because we have civil rights legislation. We know that there's a minimum wage, right? And so what your union contract would do would be to build on the protections provided by law, which are not much, right? Like I think compared to other countries, our workplace protections are paltry, right? Like other countries have things like paid maternity leave and things like vacation and certain holidays, right? Like things that aren't guaranteed to American workers. And the way you get those guarantees is you fight for a union to get a union contract. So that if you do have a grievance procedure, which provides just cause, that would go in place of the at-will employment. In fact, the only way to not be at will a lot of the time is through a union contract. Lauren has another question here. If you work from home and your employer is based in another state, the state laws that concern your employer are the ones in the state where the organization is founded. Sarah, I'm going to hand that off to you.
Well, actually, and Lauren, that's a great question. I think it might be best if we address that a little bit later on in the training, because I know that there's still a lot of material that we want to cover. Mariana, do you want to talk to our audience about the overview of a campaign model?
I do. So what I'm going to show is the campaign model that we've developed at the Steelworkers to follow. And this is really the path that we've had that, you know, we've had a lot of losses, and then we developed this model, and now we have more successful campaigns. And so if you're running a campaign with the Steelworkers, then this is the way that we're going to want you to go. One thing I want to draw your attention to is that this orangish reddish level election is near the top. And there's actually bigger, wider, foundational parts of the pyramid that are underneath that level. And that's because the election is really close to the end of the campaign. You'll see right below that in base building, go public, that's in the middle of the campaign, which means in the lower two levels, you're not public, you're secret, which is something we're going to continue talking about throughout the presentation. Just so you understand how a union election would work under the National Labor Relations Board, there's two ways to do it that are both provided by the National Labor Relations Act, the federal law that protects your right to organize. The first is one that is not generally used, and it's called voluntary recognition. And that means that you and your coworkers, a majority of you show your support for having a union either by signing a petition or by signing cards. And then you tell your employer, hey, a majority of us want a union. Will you please just recognize our union? And your employer can say yes. They normally don't, because they don't want you to have a union, because they don't want you to have power, they don't want you to have a voice at work. But voluntary recognition is sometimes a way to go. It's definitely an easier way to go. What normally has to happen is running an election through the National Labor Relations Board, in which case you and your coworkers would sign cards. They're called authorization cards. And the card is basically saying, I want to have an election to see if the United Steelworkers, to vote to have the United Steelworkers as our collective bargaining representative. Then you submit that petition to the National Labor Relations Board, and then they run an election. It's secret ballot. There's also a lag between when you file your petition and when the election happens. The lag used to be shorter, and recently it became longer because Donald Trump appointed everybody who's running the National Labor Relations Board right now. So shockingly, we have worse rules for workers. During that period between the petition and the election, your employer is going to run an anti-union campaign. It might be a nice one, it might be an ugly one, it might be a subtle one, it might be not so subtle, but it's going to happen again, because they don't want to lose this power, the complete power that they have in the workplace. And I want to point to that because it's the way you're probably going to have your union election, which is also why the bottom parts of this pyramid are so important. I don't want to go into it too much, but what I do want to say is that the role of the organizer in this is to help you get through this pyramid. You, as an employee and a person who wants to organize a union at your workplace, you and your coworkers are going to do the work. Because me, I'm a stranger. I don't know your coworkers. They have no reason to believe me. They have no reason to trust me, but they do have a relationship with you and with others in the workplace. So most of the conversations that are going to be going on are going to be coworker to coworker. The organizer is there to help you think through the strategy and how to get through this pyramid so you can not only win your union, but win a good first contract. So here we are. You're excited about forming a union. That's why you're at this workshop. You know you have the legal right to participate in forming a union, and you know that a big part of the work is actually having conversations with you and your coworkers. So how do we do it, right? Like this is the so can I say that at work part of the training. First, you should think carefully about who you should talk to. The best place to start is people you trust. If there's somebody who you have a close relationship to, who's going to understand that the conversation is confidential, that would be a good place to start. Again, because the campaign should not be public. And by public, we mean management should not know about the campaign until at least we get to that green base building phase. That means that most of these conversations should not be happening in big groups. These should be one-on-one conversations so that you can really get into the issues. And as you'll see in the conversation we're going to model for you, which if we were meeting in a non-COVID world, we would be asking you to practice, right? But anyway, there's a lot of reasons we want to live in a non-COVID world. Part of this is helping to build the relationships between you and your coworkers and build on that trust. So talk to people you trust, do it one-on-one. Don't talk to supervisors, even if they're your friends, even if they have some of the same gripes about upper management that you do. Supervisors are not protected by the National Labor Relations Act, which means like they can get fired for participating in union activity. So the same protections that may apply to you may not apply to them. And also supervisors work for management. And so even if you're friends, you have to think about really where the, where the paychecks come from. So don't get supervisors involved. Leaders, this is going to be important throughout the campaign because you need leaders in order to bring other people with them. Now, what's a leader? The simplest way to think about it is a leader is somebody who has followers. A lot of us don't like thinking about our workplaces in these terms because I think they sometimes have different connotations, but I can assure you that these relationships and these networks already exist in your workplace. Your workplace is already organized, right? Like there's already ways that information gets through your workplace and the way you find out things and the way, birthday parties, condolence cards, football pools, those all get organized. What the organizing campaign will have to do is harness those already existing networks and use them to help, gain support for the union. So for leaders, we're really talking about people who have influence over others. Who do people go to when they need help at work? If you have a question you don't want to ask your supervisor, who do you talk to? That person is likely a leader, and we should try and identify those people. And if we think they're going to be supportive, have these sorts of conversations with them. And finally, another good place to start is people who who've had troubles at work that they haven't had any luck in addressing. It may be somebody who thought they deserved a bigger raise and talked to their manager about it and nothing happened. It may be somebody who needed a little bit more leeway with taking a personal leave and it didn't happen, right? It might be somebody who has issues with their supervisor and is being denied a transfer. So think about people who would have interests in changing the way the workplace works, that you also trust, And again, these should be one-on-one conversations at the beginning, because by the time you think you have enough support to really push a campaign through, my hope is that you'll be working with an organizer so that we can think about it and strategize and do it thoughtfully and keep you as safe as possible, but also help you run a campaign that is as successful as possible. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah for the next slide.
Thank you, Mariana. So yes, this is Sarah. And I want to actually just emphasize something that Mariana just said. It's never too early to approach Mariana or someone like Mariana, a union organizer who does this all the time, to help guide you through this process. And in fact, I'm going to cover really more the where and when you can say, and also a little bit of what you can say. And as I discuss this piece, you'll appreciate this even more. So as Mariana already alluded to, not all union talk is equally protected in the workplace. And again, this is because the National Labor Relations Board is appointed by the president. Unsurprisingly, the way in which the law has been interpreted and how much protection you have has been diminished by the current labor board. There have been recent changes to this area of law. And in fact, when Mariana and I first created this training, the law was different. So again, feel free, it's never too early to contact a union to get help with organizing. Now, there's something called solicitation, which usually means asking a coworker to sign an authorization card to join a union. This is not the same thing as talking about a union and whether or not talking about a union and whether or not you think a union would be good or bad for your workplace. Now, the NLRB has previously decided that an employer may prohibit solicitation during work time because the board believed it prompted an immediate response from the worker, and that would then interfere with their work and they would be less productive. In a recent decision by the NLRB called WIN, the labor board has basically expanded solicitation when it found that an employer may categorically prohibit conversations that encourage a worker to vote for or against a union during work time. So not asking a fellow coworker to sign a union card, but encouraging them to vote for a union. By redefining or expanding this definition of solicitation in this recent decision, practically speaking, almost every conversation about unions during the lead up to a union election is prohibited during work time. So our takeaway to you: talk to your coworkers before and after work hours. If you're still going to your office or to your work site for work, talk to your colleagues away from that work site. If you're working remotely, if your hours were before the pandemic, say 9 to 5, then have those conversations after 5 p.m. or before 9 in the morning. And again, I can't say this enough, always feel free to contact someone such as Mariana to get assistance. It is their job and they're happy to help you. And they're up on changes that the labor board rolls out. So that's why we want your guidance working with a union. I also want to quickly note that because it's decisions like when, it's so important that you go out and vote in November. So please take a moment during the course at Netroots when you have some downtime, make sure your voter registration is up to date, request a mail-in ballot or figure out another way you can vote safely in November. If you don't think your vote counts, just look to decisions like when that erode workers' rights. They absolutely make a difference. Mariana, do you want to cover some information about the techniques involved with talking to coworkers?
I do. This is really what we've been building to, right? So we understand the law, we understand, and again, I can't emphasize what Sarah said enough, that When we came up with this workshop, the law was better, and now it's worse. So we're saying the safest thing to do is to have these conversations, non-work area, non-work time. That, however, was always the best advice for keeping your campaign secret. So in that respect, we would have given the same advice. Do it carefully, thoughtfully, with an idea towards not being public until you're ready to be public. So these conversations, it is going to be a structured conversation. You're going to start these conversations with the idea of what you want to accomplish. Now, there was in the question and answer, how has the organizing pyramid changed with COVID, and it has to be all virtual. And I said in the chat, it didn't change at all. We have electronic cards, but it did change in that the opportunity to have kind of like organic conversations is different, because if people are working remotely, you're not running into people and being like, hey, let's catch lunch. Let's get lunch together. Let's get a drink after work, where you could have this conversation. So you might need to make up some kind of excuse to have this conversation outside of work. Here's what the conversation is going to be. So again, remember that social movements are built on social relationships, and your organizing campaign very specifically will be built on the social networks that exist or can be built or expanded in your workplace. Frankly, your local union is going to be built on the same thing. So now is a good time to start thinking about this. Things to remember when going into the conversation. I like to think about the ratio between my ears and my mouth. So I have 2 ears, I have 1 mouth, which tells me I should be listening more than I should be talking. Some people like to go with like an 80-20 listen to talk ratio. Some people like 70-30. I think the 2-to-1 gets the point across that I should be doing more listening than talking in this conversation. And the reason I want to do more listening is not just because I'm a wonderful conversationalist and a nice person, but because one of my goals in this conversation is to identify the issues that my coworker has. So you're going to ask questions to help identify some of the problems that they might be having at work. These are coworkers that you trust. So my guess is that you already have an inkling about what bothers them in the work environment. And so you'll just be talking with them and really learning more about their issues there. And then we do something that we call agitate, which I think another way of talking about it is really just like validating the problems, right? And so if the issue is, I only get 12 weeks of FMLA for parental leave, but like I gave birth and it was really messy and I could have really used 15 weeks, and also it would have been great if it had been paid, right? Validate that, that is a challenge and that that's something that's a problem in the workplace and that the law doesn't provide enough. And then what you're going to do is actually try and pivot the issue you've identified and validated / agitated, and then turn it to a solution. One of the ways that we like to start that is by asking if the individual has tried to solve the problem themselves. And generally, the answer, if they have tried, is that it wasn't very useful. And so then it's about asking well, what do you think if all of us got together and tried to address the problem? You can go through this entire conversation without using the word union, because what you're really interested is if your coworker agrees with the concept that collective action is a solution. So Sarah and I are going to do a very small role play to talk about this, and then we're going to get to the questions that are going into the question and answer. If you have additional questions while we do this, put them in there, and I promise we'll get to them in the end. But first, we're going to model this conversation.
And actually, forgive me, this is Sarah speaking. Sorry to interrupt, Mariana. One thing that I want to mention that sort of is interwoven with all of this, and that you'll see in the model conversation we're about to portray for you, it's really, really important to not only do these conversations off work time, off your work site, but also off work devices. So don't use your work email address to have these conversations. Don't use work phone, cell phone. Your Zoom account. If your employer is providing a Zoom account for meetings and you get off a meeting that's been really frustrating and your coworker that you're really close to and you really trust and you think you can have a conversation, don't do it, because you should just assume that that meeting is being recorded and it is your employer's Zoom account. So again, don't use your employer's devices for facilitating these conversations. We recognize that in the time of COVID, you may not be able to get together face to face with your coworkers to have these talks, but make sure to do them on your personal devices, off work time, off the work site. Mariana, take it back over.
We also need their contact information off of work for the first step of the pyramid, so it's fine. So Sarah, we both work at a nonprofit, am I right?
Yes, it's the Protect the Purple Pandas organization.
So this is me and Sarah. I'm the person interested in organizing, and I'm going to have a conversation with Sarah to see if she's also interested in organizing. We're doing a FaceTime happy hour, so even though we're on Zoom right now. Okay. Sarah, it's so good to see you. I miss running into you at the office.
Yeah, it's great to see you. You look well. It's good to see you.
You do too. How's it going? How's work? We haven't talked in forever.
Yeah, it's okay. You know, things are hard right now with the pandemic.
Yeah? What's hard particularly?
Well, I have to go into work every now and again. Yeah, and I don't understand why.
When did that start?
I think it started, I don't know, a month or so ago when our county went green.
Yeah. Did anybody, I mean, I guess, why do you have to go in?
Well, because of the work that I do, they want me to go into the office, and I get it. I mean, I have a lot of large mailings to do. I'm an assistant development director, as you remember, and so you know there's some large mailings, and yeah, it might be useful to use the office equipment, but I don't understand why I have to go in like to do it like while everyone else is there.
What do you mean everyone else is there? Who else is there?
Well, I mean, there's actually quite a few people there. I mean, it's weird. It seems like some people are working from home and some people aren't working from home.
Yeah, I'm going to take a time out here just so we can kind of dissect the conversation that's happening. So I've tried to use an organic opportunity that actually I manufactured, right? Because like organic opportunities are hard to come by. But you'll see that I'm doing much more listening in this conversation. I'm asking Sarah questions. So now I understand that she has to go into the office. Sometimes she has to do mailings, but other people are in the office as well. And so I'm gonna delve into that more. We're gonna go back into the conversation. Do you feel safe at work?
Not really.
Is there a way that, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, they've tried to make some attempts to keep people safe, but I mean, there's just so much we still don't know.
Yeah. Have you talked to your manager about it all?
I tried, but I didn't really get very far.
Did you like have another idea about how to make it safer?
Yeah, actually, I asked her, I said, you know, could I come in after work hours when people aren't there and do these mailings, which I think is going to be safer for me and safer for everyone in the office. I mean, it just makes sense. Anyone that can and should work from home should work from home. And unless, I mean, for me, because I need some of the printing equipment, you know, on occasion, it'd be great to go into work, but I'd rather do that either before the office opens or after the office closes, or even like on a Sunday or something.
I mean, that sounds reasonable to me. What did she say?
She didn't really answer.
So time out again. So now we have the issue, right? And then we're starting to think about a solution. And we understand that Sarah has tried to address this individually and it didn't go anywhere. So now I'm going to see if she's thought about addressing it with a group, right? And by that, I'm going to hopefully figure out if Sarah thinks that collective action is a good way to resolve this issue, if she's considered it at all, what her reaction to it is, kind of. So we'll see what happens. So, I mean, that seems crazy to me, and it also seems like a pretty easy fix in terms of just making sure there are less people in the office. Have you thought about talking to everybody who has to go into the office and you guys asking for kind of these staggered shifts together?
Didn't really think about that. I didn't know if anyone else would be interested. I mean, I thought it was just a problem that related to me.
Do you think management would react any differently if it was more than just one person asking for it?
Possibly. I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah. So stop. That's the end. Basically, that is the conversation that at the beginning stages of a union campaign you can be having. You'll see that we didn't use the word union at all. We didn't use work time. We didn't use work devices, work networks, work software, work nothing, right? But now I understand that Sarah has an issue that is also like fairly widespread, and that managers aren't doing about anything about it when people ask individually. So this means that maybe I talk to other people who are affected by this. Maybe I get Sarah to talk to other people about this. And then, maybe eventually we start talking about, what if we form a union together? If I'm really tight with Sarah, maybe I'll do it right now. We're just kind of like so tight. We're just like work friends, right? So there's a lot of ways that it can go, but the first steps can be really low key and really easy. And again, once we've started organizing campaigns with just like one or two people who are interested in forming a union. So it's never too early to start talking to a union about the best and safest ways to do this. Sarah, should we answer some questions?
I think that would be a great idea, Mariana.
So there's somebody anonymous who has a discount union at their nonprofit. I'm not familiar with that term. Are you?
Not offhand, but if you want, and this may be, I know we're starting to wind down, we'll obviously try and address as much as we can, but Mariana, if you want to just repost our contact information so you can follow up with Mariana and myself at the end or after this training concludes, we'd be happy to try and answer, especially if some of these questions are more specifically tailored. We're happy to talk to you offline.
Yeah. Let's move to Kieran, speaking generally about a felt sense that unions create animosity in the workplace and stifle negotiation and cooperation. So I actually have like an on-point story about this. Here in Pittsburgh, the Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh organized last year, and I'm helping bargain their first contract. And we're doing these walkthroughs as the branches open, which has never been done. The libraries were closed and now they're getting open to the public, and the employees are concerned about their health and also the health of their customers. And so we're doing these safety walkthroughs, and it's people from management and then a health and safety expert from the steelworkers and then 2 library workers. And at one of the most recent walkthroughs, what actually happened is that as employees were coming into work, because they were coming in even though the branch was closed to do curbside delivery, they all just started having a conversation together in terms of fixing, like trying to resolve a problem that is going to come up when they open up to the public again. And so management and labor work together, and the employees who are actually affected and the managers who are actually affected, the people who know the workplace best, came up with a solution that will be implemented. Are there places where there is animosity between union and management? Yes. But for me, as a person who's been in bargaining and also like helping unions grow stronger, for me, it's not a goal. I think we actually have our most productive contracts where we actually have a good relationship with management.
If I could just, excuse me, this is Sarah, if I could also just jump in and add to that. I mean, the collective bargaining agreement, we touched on this earlier, but it's a blueprint, and it's useful for you and your coworkers to know what's expected of you, but it's also what the employer knows is expected. And like Mariana, yes, there are plenty of employers out there that will fly in the face of a collective bargaining agreement, where there may be animosity, but there are just as many other places where that's not the case. Having a collective bargaining agreement, or I like to think of negotiations as democracy at the table, this is an opportunity for problems to be solved. And in fact, there are instances, if you have, in fact, a productive, good working labor management committee, that's where some of these things can come up and be addressed. And at the end of the day, that's going to yield better predictability, stability in the workplace, and employers want that. I mean, if you're at ease and you know what is expected of you, then you're going to be a better worker bee. Similarly, if you know that your voice is taken into consideration, and you're going to potentially have, in some instances, expertise that even your employer doesn't know, you might even be able to improve the workplace, and the employer may ultimately be thankful for that.
Yeah, I also have found that having a union contract and having a union, somebody like a way that the workers can actually speak for themselves, it actually helps managers be better managers. Because sometimes, a lot of times when organizing campaigns start, it's because of favoritism, because discipline isn't fairly handed out. Some people get in trouble for one thing, some people don't. And if there is a union contract in place, it actually helps managers become better. Lauren, what about nonprofits who only have like 20, 30 staff? I mean, yes, people organize them. Feel free to contact me if it's not a good fit for the steelworkers, or if you're in DC. So if you're in DC, I would contact NPEU, the Nonprofit Employees Union. If you're outside of DC, we can find somebody for you. I don't think the small size of it necessarily is a killer for the campaign. Anonymous attendee, how do you bargain around a manager who's a problem manager? Yelling, personal attacks, bringing up inappropriate thing, and not listening to staff feedback. Lauren, Sarah, do you have a response to that?
Well, I mean, I think potentially, if you're in the process of forming a union, if you have a supervisor or a manager there, they could be a fantastic instigator for why you should form a union.
Yeah, and I think at the bargaining table, so first, if it's a lower level manager, it shouldn't be an issue, because normally bargaining happens with like the HR rep and like, probably the plant manager or something like that, or something, the CEO or executive director or their designees. It's happening at higher levels of management. If it is an issue at negotiations, I mean, there's a various ways that we can address it. It can be with actions that happen in the workplace, so that the manager sees that actually, the people who are representing the union at the bargaining table have the support of a vast majority of the employees. If it's somebody that's a little bit more expendable, sometimes you can have side conversations with other members of management and help them see that the problem manager is actually being a hindrance to the collective bargaining process. But there's definitely ways around that. And then Joe, specific advice for organizing public employees that don't traditionally organize. He's a public defender, and many lawyers are leery of unions and organizing. I mean, Sarah and I are both lawyers and have both been organizers. Certainly there are public defenders who are represented elsewhere. Here in Allegheny County, the steelworkers actually represent the public defenders and the DAs. I know that in the Bay Area, that IFPTE represents the federal public defenders. And so, Joe, I think there's definitely people to talk to, and you should feel free to reach out to me. I'm speaking to some public defenders in another part of the country about organizing. And I think it's, I think in this way that lawyers are not so different from other workers, because skepticism about unions is pretty prevalent throughout our country, thanks to a lot of the rhetoric that goes on.
And Joe, I can attest to the fact that when I commenced my legal career, I actually worked in New York City as an agency attorney, and I was represented by a union. So they're out there, they can help you. I can similarly speak to, while not attorneys, but I previously worked in Illinois, where I represented faculty and staff at public universities. So again, academic types, very intellectual, sometimes very weary of unions. And I can tell you that even some of the most skeptical members that I worked with over time, I think they saw the benefit of collective action and what a union could achieve for them, that their potential letters to the president and other actions they may have taken individually wasn't as successful.
So Joe, there's hope. That's what we're saying. I just want to wrap up and say thanks for coming to this. I think right now, people, especially with the pandemic going on, people are understanding that their employers don't always have their best interests at heart. And maybe there's a different way that this can happen, and that people can actually bring their voices to be heard and improve their working conditions. And the way to do it is through unionizing and through forming your union. And so again, union organizers, we're here to help. We want to help you through this process. The steel workers want to help you through this process. We've given you the most basic skills with the most basic information about the law to help you start this journey. But if this is something you're very interested in and want to push forward, please reach out to us. Sarah's put our contact information in the chat. We are very happy to have had you. We hope you enjoy the rest of Netroots Nation. And Jeremy is saying that this recording will be available shortly after. So thank you. Sarah, do you want to close out?
No, I mean, thank you so much. We really appreciate you attending. Feel free to contact Mariana. We want to help you on talking to your coworkers. It's never too early to reach out to a union. And we want to get you started so you can improve your workplace.
Thanks. So we'll stay on and we can, I think we get kicked out at 11 in like 2 minutes.
But that I think in 4 minutes. So if there are any last minute burning questions, or if you have something more specific and you want to email us at our respective email addresses, feel free to do that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah and Mariana. Great job.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
I'll leave the webinar open for 3 more minutes.
Okay. Sarah, we finished on time.
Yes.
I feel good. Oh, we got a question.
We did get a question.
Nonprofit kind of stuff. Lauren, I think your concern is being felt by nonprofits everywhere. I think it is a reason to unionize because unions are no stranger to there not being money. But what having your union and a seat at the bargaining table means that you and your coworkers would have a chance to talk with your management in terms of priorities, right? Like, even though there's like less money, there's still money and it's still being prioritized for certain things. And so the important thing is through the negotiations process, you guys can come to an agreement about what those priorities should be. But I hear you, and I think it's pretty prevalent, and I think it's an excellent reason to organize. Oh, well, I mean, it could be going to management salaries, right, Lauren? I mean, you know it. The thing is, you also don't know where the money's going, right? You know what they tell you about where the money's going. When you get your union, then you actually have a right to information and you can help verify some of the things that they tell you. particularly if they're saying that they can't afford things like raises or better health insurance, that sort of thing.
James, thanks to your comment. We're glad you found that this was very informative. We hope it helps.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Have a great Netroots, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Bye.